Welcome to the Malt Miller YouTube channel, homebrewers, and in this video we're taking things right back to the start. We're going to be brewing a beer kit. Now, if you've ventured on this video and you've not brewed at home yet, then let's take a minute just to explore what a beer kit is and why it's a perfect way to start home brewing. Now, when commercial brewers or home brewers that are brewing beer using grain, the first job on the list is to create wort. Now, wort is the sugary liquid that comes from us soaking the grains, such as malted barley, rye, wheat, oats. They get soaked in hot water. This converts the starches that are present in those grains into sugars that our yeast loves to eat. Now, this sugary liquid, which I've already said is called wort, actually that can take a big chunk of time to do. Normally a few hours when you're brewing with this method. What a beer kit is though, is actually that wort has already been produced for you by the manufacturer, and then it's been condensed down into a concentrated form, packaged up, in some cases flavored with different hop additions and sometimes fruit additions, so that actually your job at home as a home brewer can be much easier, and you can get cracking with fermentation really quickly, converting that sugar that's present in the liquid into alcohol. Now, there's a few amazing reasons why using beer kits to get started in home brewing is a real positive. Firstly, the width of range that's now available within beer kits is huge. If you're into English best bitters, mild ales, ESBs, any of that kind of stuff from the UK, then there's tons of those available. But also we've got loads of really good hoppy beers from kind of the US. And also there's some really special stuff in there. Belgian beers, for example, sour beers. Literally, the world is your oyster with this. Secondly, the outlay that you need for equipment isn't actually that vast. I'll come on to that in more detail shortly. But in terms of like investing in a hobby, to get going with beer kits, you really don't need a huge amount. The third thing though, and this for me is the most important, it teaches you about a vital part of the brewing process, which is fermentation. It's going to teach you about yeast, it's going to teach you about looking after yeast, it's going to teach you about packaging at the end, it's going to give you patience whilst you're waiting for things to happen. But if you master fermentation and then decide to move on to all grain brewing, you'll have a very good foundation for that part of the hobby. Now, the beer kit that I've chosen today to brew is a really classic beer kit, and it's from a range that's been going for many years now, and it's the Cooper's Original Australian Pale Ale. Now, in this tin is going to be the concentrated wort, the malt extract that we're going to be using to add the bulk of flavour and fermentable sugars to our beer. Also in the packet is our yeast, which plays a vital role. Without yeast, we simply can't have beer. Now, this beer kit is also what we call pre-hopped. So the liquid malt extract has had hops added to it during its manufacturing process to give us that bitterness and also some of the floral notes which we come to expect from hops in our beers. This is a 1 tin kit, which means that actually inside here there's not quite enough sugar to get us to the exact kind of alcohol volume and content we would want in our finished beer. With these 1 tin kits, you have a couple of options. One is to add extra sugar, called brewing sugar or dextrose, and you add a certain amount of it, normally 1 kilo to 1.5 kilos, into the mix as you're brewing the beer. However, what that can also do is thin the kit out, so you end up with a beer kit at the end that maybe isn't quite as full-bodied as you would like. You get the alcohol, but you lose some of the extra body because you're just using sugar. Now, sugar's got nothing else there that the yeast wants or that will benefit the beer. So it's literally just food for the yeast to convert into alcohol. So what we're going to be doing is using one of the Cooper's actual beer enhancers. So they're going to be adding extra sugar, which helps us get to that ABV that we want in our finished beer, the alcohol content, but they're also adding extra body and flavour because they've got additional malted barley in them and that maltodextrin as well. So these are a great way to get started with a beer kit and actually when you get started, end up with a far better result. And actually, what you want from your first couple of beer kits is a result that's going to get you coming back again to brew another one, because the first one was so good. For this part of the process where we're actually brewing a beer kit, I'm just going to take you through briefly the kind of equipment that you need. And as I said, it really isn't vast at all. To get things going, you're going to need a bucket. Now, this is a fermentation bucket that we sell here at the Malt Miller. It's made out of really robust plastic. It's not clear, and that's really important because we don't want UV light getting into our beer whilst it's in our bucket fermenting, or when it's in bottles. More on that later. Now, we've got a hole in the lid here, and the reason we've got a hole in the lid is so that we can fit our grommet and our airlock. Now, the airlock basically lets carbon dioxide out of the fermenter, which is produced by the yeast, but it doesn't let anything nasty in. And I'll show you how to set one of those up shortly. Second to that, you're going to need a tap on your fermenter, because when it comes to packaging your beer, you need a way of drawing that out in a controlled way that isn't going to get loads of oxygen mixed in with your beer. Now, we recommend using the white taps that we sell because they fit onto what we call a bottling wand. Again, I'll come onto that later in the video. But then they've also got this little dam on the back that prevents some of the dead yeast and other things that we call trub from getting drawn into your bottles. So that's our fermenter. We're also going to need a paddle. Now, this is a stainless steel one. We sell plastic ones as well that you can use. Links for all of this will be down in the description below. And we need this to be able to mix everything together and make sure that all of our beer kit is fully dissolved. This is kind of optional, but also a really good investment. And it's a hydrometer. Hydrometers are used to measure gravity points, which is basically how much sugar is in solution in your liquid. And by taking a reading at the beginning and at the end of fermentation, we can work out what alcohol content we've got in our finished beer. We've got a little plastic trial jar that we use to take samples from the fermenter to put our hydrometer into. And then over here, we're talking about cleaning and sanitizing. Actually, the most important thing you can do as a brewer is keep everything really, really clean, sparkling and sanitized before you're going to be brewing with it. So we've got a powder cleaning chemical. In this case, it's ChemClean. There are loads of different options available. This is actually really easy to use and does an amazing job at getting rid of debris or dirt or anything that's been caked onto any of your equipment, such as your fermenter bucket, before you go to use it. Then we've got some no rinse sanitizer. Now, it's important that with cleaning, we treat it in 2 steps. So we clean first and then we sanitize. And what we like to do is make sure that we've got sanitizer on hand, mixed up, ready to go throughout all of brew day. And we'll show you a bit more on that shortly. Now, the other thing I've got here, this is sodium metabisulfate. And basically what this does is we add it to the water we're going to be using to brew with if it's tap water, and it removes chlorine out of that tap water. And that single step makes a huge difference to your finished beer. Lastly, a spray bottle. Now, spray bottles filled with sanitizer are going to be your best friend when you're making beer, whether that's from grain or whether it's from a beer kit. It's so handy to be able to just spray everything down that you're using, you know, get your mash paddle or spray your tap before you're taking samples out. So we recommend investing in a decent spray bottle. These ones that we sell, which are the Foxy Plus, they're really cool because you can flip them upside down and they keep spraying. Doesn't matter what angle you've got them in, which just can make things really, really handy. Right, now let's crack on with actually brewing this beer kit. Now, the first thing we need to do when we get into any form of brewing is make sure that our equipment is clean and sanitized. Now, I've already cleaned everything we're going to be using today, but I really do want to focus on sanitizing because this is important and needs to be done right before you're about to use anything. So I've mixed up some of our no rinse sanitizer. I've got it in a trug here. I find it really handy to have something like this on hand during brew day, just to chuck things in that I know are going to come into contact with my wort during the process. So we've got a couple of litres mixed up in there, and we've also got a jug with some sanitizer in as well, which again I'll come on to in a minute and I'll show you what I'm going to be doing with that. I've taken everything off of my equipment and broken it all down, and that's because all of this needs to go into the sanitizer and actually just give it a little mix around, make sure that every part of it's nice and covered. This stuff is going to make sure that if there's any like little nasties that we can't see on the equipment, that it isn't going to cause us any problems. Now the next thing I need to do is actually using my spray bottle with some sanitizer in, get into the bucket and actually just spray down and around the hole where the tap fits. And again, this is just because that's going to be kind of encased with some of the tap and maybe wouldn't be as accessible when we come on to sanitizing the entire bucket. So this has had maybe a minute or two in the sanitizer now, and that's absolutely plenty. It will have done its job. We can now move on to assembling everything. So the first thing we're going to do is get the components for our tap all together. So these taps come in a couple of different pieces. So you've got a couple of rubber O-rings. Now we only need the one that's actually fitted onto the tap right at the back, because that goes on the outside of the bucket. And then we've also got the back nut, which, like I said, you can see there, has got that plastic dam that just holds things back from getting drawn into your finished beer when we come to bottling. What we have to do here is just put the tap through the hole, take the back nut, screw it into place. We need to make sure it's hand tight. We don't want to actually really tighten this up too much, because it can cause the washer on the outside to splice, kind of squeeze out of position. That could cause us some leaks. And we also make sure that the tap is turned off, because when we start adding liquid into here, what we don't want to end up with is wet feet. Now the reason I've got a jug of sanitizer is because now we're ready to sanitize the entire fermenter bucket. So pouring in a couple of litres into there. We take the lid, put the lid on, clip it down into place, and then actually what we can do is fit our airlock components. So we've got a little black rubber grommet which pushes into the hole here, and then we can take our airlock, push that in, put the little cap on. Now comes the fun bit, where we need to give this a bit of a shake to get all of the surfaces inside sanitized. Literally all we have to do now is leave that to sit for a couple of minutes, empty it, and then we can crack on with actually making our beer kit. Okay, now we're going to get onto the fun part, which is mixing up our beer kit. The first thing we need to do, break open the lid, take that off, take off our packet of yeast that comes with the beer kit, put that to one side. We'll need that in a little bit, but I actually need you to be patient now again, because what we're going to do is put our beer kit, the liquid, remember, that's in here, it's quite thick and sticky, so we're going to put it into some hot water. We're going to leave it for about 15 minutes or so. What that's going to do is just help soften up the liquid that's inside this. What it means is, whilst that's taking place and warming up, you can familiarise yourself with any instructions you might have, get a cup of tea made, whatever it is you want to do. But this is the first part, and it's a really important step, because what this is going to do is mean that when you actually pour the liquid out into our fermenter, it's going to flow far more freely and you're going to get more out of it in one go. Okay, so our beer kit's been sat in hot water for about 15 minutes or so. Now this water was about 75 degrees C. You can use really hot tap water. You can boil some water and just let it come down off the boil. But the key here is just to get it warm enough so that when we pour it into the bucket, it's going to flow nice and freely. So the first thing we need to do is open up our fermenter, and if you remember, we added a load of sanitizer to this, so we need to dump that out. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to add a couple of litres of really hot water into the fermenter, and again that's so that we can get everything dissolved that we need to. So we're going to be brewing 23 litres in total with this beer kit. We need probably about 4 litres of very hot water to get things going. So that's 2 litres in. I'm going to grab a couple of extra litres and pour that in as well. Okay, now if you remember when I was talking through the equipment and the cleaning things that we needed, I talked about sodium metabisulfate and its role in the brewing process. Now what I've done is added a very small amount of that sodium metabisulfate to the water that we're using to mix up our beer kit. Now, you don't have to do this, but it removes the chlorine. Now, especially if you're using tap water, this is going to make a difference to the finished product. If you're using bottled water, which some people choose to do, there's no need to do this. Or if your water source doesn't have any chlorine in, then neither do you. Okay, so the next thing, and this is where the fun really begins, we're going to take our beer kit. Now, for this one, because it's a canned beer kit, we're going to need a can opener. Clamp that on, open the lid up, and I can already smell the malt extract that's in there shining through. It's wonderful. I guarantee you'll fall in love with it. Now just twist that off, and like I said, we've got our lovely malt extract in there, and as I said, it smells fantastic. Now, picking that up carefully, I'm just going to bring our bucket over, and we now need to pour the malt extract in. And this is where the situation with heating the tin up beforehand really pays dividends, because it flows nice and freely into there. Inside the tin there, you'll be able to see that there's quite a lot of malt extract left behind. So this is where we need a little bit more hot water just to pour into the tin, give it a little bit of a shake around to loosen it all up, and then we'll pour that back in. Okay, so I've filled that with almost to the top with very hot water. I'm going to take our paddle, which has been sat in sanitizer, and I'm just going to put it into the tin, give it a little stir around, and that's just making sure we're getting every last drop of that wonderful malt extract out of the tin. Now, this is where having that sanitizer to hand is really useful, because I can just put that straight back in there and know that when I come to use it again, it's going to be perfectly fine to come in contact with our wort. Again, picking this up carefully because it's hot. Pour the rest of that in there. And now what we need to do is add our beer enhancer before we start mixing things up. So this one, which comes from Cooper's, is in a powdered format. Just need to use some scissors to cut that open. And I'm going to dump that straight in as well. So that's our beer enhancer and our malt extract in that hot water, all ready for us to grab our mash paddle and give it all a good mix, making sure that we're trying to mix in any lumps that have formed in there and just get everything nicely kind of loosened up and amalgamated. Now, it's a good idea to give this a stir for a few minutes, because that's going to really help us, because one of the things that our yeast loves is oxygen. So we're going to be giving this a good stir now, and we're also going to give it a really good stir once we've topped it all the way up to that 23 litre mark with cold water. Cool, so I can see now that all the lumps are gone, there's no bits and pieces in there, everything's nicely mixed together. I've been focusing on getting right down into the corners, because that liquid malt extract has a habit of kind of sitting in the corners of the bucket. Now we need to top it up with cold water all the way to the 23 litre mark on the side of the fermenter. Okay, here we go, first jug of water in. We'll just carry on doing this until we hit that 23 litre line round on the markings on the side of the bucket. Okay, so I'm going in with our last couple of litres of cold water. I'm just keeping an eye on the graduations on the side, because you can't really see through the foam at the top to see where you're at. And there we go, pretty much on the money. Now, this is another fun part for me, being able to get into this mix with our paddle and give everything another really good stir. Now, we want to be quite vigorous with this stir, because what we really want to do to give our yeast the best chance is get quite a bit of oxygen into this. And we can tell we're doing that because we'll get that nice foam appearing on the top of the kit. And as I've said before, the smell out of this is wonderful, and I never get tired of it. Regardless of whether I'm making beer from a kit or from grain, the smell is just divine, and it's one of the things that keeps me coming back to making beer at home time and time again. Right, so now everything's mixed up, we can move on to our final part of this part in the process. That's adding our yeast. Now, the beer kits that you can buy generally come with their own yeast. One thing you can do to actually kind of customize your beer kit is use different yeast strains, because each yeast strain, a bit like hops and malt varieties, they're going to add their own characteristics to the finished beer. So if you want to learn a bit more about how to customize your beer kits, we've got a video on that. There's a link up here, go and check it out. All we need to do here, make sure we take some clean and sanitized scissors, cut the top off, sprinkle our yeast over the top of the foam. And now that's going to start doing its magic and turning all those sugars into the alcohol, and actually the yeast is what makes beer. Right, so we just need to take our lid, give that a little spray down with a bit more sanitizer. I like to just give the rim of the bucket a bit of a spray as well. Pop that on. Make sure the lid is nicely sealed so that we're keeping all of the carbon dioxide in there other than what's coming out through the airlock, and we're not letting any air get in, because actually some of the airborne stuff is what can contaminate our beer and end up with a spoiled batch. We just need to spray a little bit of sanitizer into the airlock, because that's actually what causes our seal to be secure. Pop the cap on there and we're good to go. Now, a couple of things on adding yeast and fermentation. Firstly, adding your yeast to the mixture if it's too warm can actually either kill the yeast or cause some off flavors in the beer. So it's important to make sure that before you add the yeast, this is around about 20 degrees. It will vary for some styles. Read the instructions on your beer kits, find out exactly what range of temperature your yeast is happy in. Now, I know that this is the right temperature, I can feel it, and my experience tells me that this is going to be absolutely fine. So I've added the yeast. Now it's all about patience. We need to pot this in a warm to ambient area in our house. If you have the ability for temperature controlled fermentation or you're interested in it, again, we've got some content about that. I'll put a link up here so you can check that out. But right at this point, when we're first starting out, all we want to do is try and maintain a steady temperature within the temperature range that's recommended for your beer kit. In this instance, because we're making an ale, it's about 20 degrees. Now, it's early summer here in the UK. The temperatures around us are perfectly fine for me to just leave this in a space in our warehouse, and I know that it's going to be more than happy with those conditions. If you're doing this in the winter, you might want to put it in your living room or a bedroom or somewhere, maybe the kitchen, that's going to be at that ambient temperature of about 18 to maybe 21, 22 degrees maximum. We're going to need to wait now for a couple of weeks to make sure that this completely ferments. Patience is the key here. You're going to see bubbles starting up here on the airlock as the CO2 is escaping during fermentation. Now, you might be tempted to think, well, hang on a minute, bubbles have stopped, so surely fermentation is done. Sometimes that's not the case. And this is where using our hydrometer that I talked about at the beginning is going to be key. I'm going to come on to that now and show you exactly how to use it. As I've already said, a hydrometer is a tool that we use to measure the dissolved sugars that is within our beer. Again, you don't have to do this when you're starting out with beer kits, because they do give you an idea of the alcoholic strength of them on the kit within the instructions. However, it's a really good practice to get into, and it will be able to tell you when fermentation is done on your beer kit. So if you've got one, you may as well take a reading at the beginning, just at this point. Now, ideally you want to do this before you've added the yeast, but we literally added the yeast only a couple of moments ago. So I'm just turning the bucket round so I can get access to the tap. Now, these taps actually spin, so you can hold on to the main body of the tap and you can turn the nozzle around. And I'm going to take our trial jar and just fill it up to about 1 inch from the top. Now, I can put the hydrometer into that sample, leave it to settle, and there's some numbers on the side of the hydrometer. Those numbers are going to tell me the content of sugar that's dissolved in there and give me a reading. Now, that is showing me I've got a gravity of 1.040. Make a note of that, okay? Because if you know that number, then when it comes to the end of fermentation, you can take another reading. What you'll then be able to do with that is plumb it into one of the calculators, such as the one we've got on our website, and it will be able to tell you the exact alcohol content that's in your finished beer. Now, as I've said, patience is key here, so let things ferment for at least 7 to 10 days. Take another gravity reading. It should be around about the 1.010 or 12 mark. Now leave it 24 hours and take another reading. What you should see is exactly the same reading. That's an indicator to say that fermentation is complete. Now, a bit more patience. It's really important that you don't rush to packaging at this point. Leave everything for a couple more days, because the yeast actually does another job after fermentation where it basically like clears up after itself and gets rid of some of the nasties that might be in there, or some of the flavors that we don't really want in our finished beer. Now that we've mixed our beer kit up and we know that patience is the thing we need to deploy now, we can just leave our beer kit and stick around, because in a moment we're going to show you the next steps, how to package your beer, and then we'll finally come on to actually trying our beer kit. Now it's been a couple of weeks and fermentation is completed on our beer kit. We've checked this using our hydrometer to make sure that the gravity reading is stable for at least 2 days. We're going to be using the Cooper's PET 500ml plastic bottles to bottle this kit. And what I love about these is they're dead easy to use because they've got a handy screw cap, and also on the inside of the cap there's a little oxygen scavenging film. Now we need to make sure we've got plenty of sanitizer on hand for all the equipment that we're going to be using to package our beer. Remove the airlock from the bucket. This will prevent drawback. Now give everything a good spray down, attach the bottling wand, open up the tap, and I like to purge the bottling wand by just filling a little cup full to make sure I've only got beer in the bottling line. Now I'm going to be using the Munson's carbonation drops to add to the bottle to give us our carbonation in the beer. You just add 2 of them to each bottle before you fill the bottle. Now it's important that our bottles are sanitized before we do anything though, so make sure that that's taken place. Then you just lift the bottle over the bottling wand, which presses the little nut at the bottom, which opens up and allows the beer to flow. Alternatively, you can do this in batches. I like to do maybe 5 or 10 at once. Take your time filling the bottles to make sure that you get the desired fill level on each of them. Then it's simply a case of going along the line, adding the caps, making sure they're screwed on nice and tightly, and then leaving the bottles for a good week or 2 to allow fermentation to take place. Then all we've got to do is clean our brew kit, ready to use next time. Now it's been a couple of weeks since we bottled our Cooper's beer kit. It's important to note that before you jump in and try your first bottle of Homebrew, make sure that they are fully carbonated, and you can do this by giving the bottle a bit of a squeeze. If it feels really firm, then you know that carbonation's taken place. The carbonation drops have been re-fermented by the yeast that's present in the bottle, and then actually what you want to do is be even more patient and wait a couple more days. And the reason for that is that post-secondary fermentation in the bottle, the yeast can create a flavour called diacetyl, which is kind of like butterscotch, you know, warm butter, butter-kiss popcorn. It will clear up, the yeast will naturally consume it and get rid of it. Once you've waited a few more days, you can then jump into trying your first bottle, and I'm really excited to try this. I've got it nice and cold. I've got a really nice clean glass here. So without further ado, I think it's time to crack this bottle open and see how this beer kit's tasting. There we go. So before I jump in, it's important to note that when you're pouring a bottle conditioned beer, you're going to get a layer of sediment at the bottom from the yeast. Try to avoid pouring that in if you want a really bright looking beer in the glass. Now, we can see that this is reasonably bright. It will clear up if you leave it longer in the bottle, but sometimes with these beers, when you put them into the fridge, you get what's called chill haze, which is just where they get cold, some of the proteins create a bit of a haze in the beer. There are ways around that, but it isn't going to affect how it tastes and drinks. So let's go in for a bit of a sniff. Oh, and there's tons of, like, as you'd expect, malt aroma. There's a little bit of light floral hoppiness to it, a little bit of spice as well. Anyway, cheers. It's been a while since I've made one of these beer kits, and do you know what? That is really exciting. Such a great beer. What follows through from the aroma is exactly what you get in the mouth. It's really nice and refreshing. A nice level of sort of light carbonation in there. I'm really, really impressed with that. And in terms of being able to get into the hobby of homebrewing with very minimal equipment and not much in the way of ingredients, I've been able to actually produce something that is really, really exciting. I hope this has inspired you all to have a go at brewing either one of these Cooper's beer kits or one of many of the beer kits that we have in stock here at the Malt Miller, and shown you just how simple it is to get into the hobby of homebrewing and be drinking some amazing beer. Now the sun's shining, I'm going to head outside and go and sit in the sun, enjoy the rest of this glass, and I hope to see you all again soon. And if you're not already, make sure that you've subscribed to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you can stay up to date with everything we're doing here at the Malt Miller. You can find us on all of the usual social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Now, all that remains for me to do is head out into the sun, finish this glorious glass of beer, and then maybe get on with some work. Cheers, have a great brew.